They hired a rancher to watch an Apache woman, but what he did left everyone breathless. The sun had barely risen over the wide, dusty plains when the rancher first heard the call. The wind moved lazily across the dry grass, carrying with it the faint scent of horses, earth, and sage. He had been up before dawn, as he always was, checking fences, repairing a gate that had sagged under the weight of a storm, and making sure the ranch cattle were calm and fed. Life on the ranch was hard, but it was honest, and he had grown used to its rhythms, the slow, steady heartbeat of the land. That morning, however, there was a different kind of urgency in the air. A local landowner, a man known for his wealth but not for his patience, had sent word. The authorities, too, were involved, though only quietly, with polite requests that he take on a task no one else seemed willing to do. There was an Apache woman living near the ranch lands. She had come back to her ancestral home, which technically was public land, but her presence had unsettled the people who lived and worked nearby. Rumors had spread. Some said she was difficult, others claimed she might cause trouble. No one really knew her, and that made her seem dangerous. The rancher was called to meet with the landowner in a small, dusty office that smelled of old leather and coffee. Papers were stacked high on the desk, and the morning sun poured through the grimy windows, cutting through the haze of cigarette smoke and dust motes. "We just need someone to watch her," the landowner said, not unkindly, but with a tone that suggested the woman was a problem. "Make sure she isn't causing damage. Keep track of her movements, that's all." The rancher leaned back in his chair, rubbing his hands over his face. He had been doing ranch work all his life, fixing fences, tending animals, riding through the plains, and solving problems that had clear solutions. But this was different. Watching a person, reporting on a person, it didn't sit right with him. "And if she's just living her life," he asked slowly, "if she isn't causing trouble," the landowner shrugged, "then you report nothing. Simple." Simple, the rancher thought, but he felt a weight settle on his shoulders. He didn't like being in the middle of gossip, suspicion, or power struggles. Still, he understood why he had been chosen. Others in town were either afraid of her or too quick to judge. They saw her independence and misunderstood it. The rancher knew fear. He had felt it himself when storms hit, when livestock went missing, and when harsh winters tested his limits. He understood caution, but he also understood fairness, and he didn't intend to act unfairly without reason. He left the office with a quiet determination. The land spread wide before him, endless blue skies, rolling hills, and the occasional cluster of trees casting shadows over the grass. He began his ride, a slow, measured pace, following paths he had ridden 100 times before. He wanted to see the woman from a distance first, not interfere, not judge, just watch, observe, understand. From the edge of a small rise he finally saw her. She was kneeling near a stream, dipping her hands into the water, moving carefully, as if she did not want to disturb the balance of her surroundings. Her hair was dark and fell loosely over her shoulders, catching the sunlight in waves of deep brown. She wore simple clothing, rough-spun but practical, suited for life outdoors. She moved with confidence but not arrogance. There was a quiet rhythm to her actions, a calm that came from knowing the land as a friend rather than a threat. The rancher felt a shift in his chest. This was not the dangerous person people had whispered about. This was someone who belonged here, someone who moved in harmony with the land. He had expected suspicion, defiance, maybe even aggression. Instead, he saw patience, care, and self-reliance. For the next few days, he kept a careful distance. He observed her from the hills, from behind clusters of trees, always making sure he remained unseen. He noticed the small things that made her life orderly and balanced. She had built a modest shelter near the stream, using logs and stones in a way that made it part of the environment, not separate from it. She fed herself from the land, gathering wild vegetables, fishing from the stream, and tending a small garden she had planted. She treated animals kindly, coaxing a scared calf back to its mother and gently shooing birds from a newly sown patch of seeds. At first, the rancher wrote simple notes, times, places, and movements. But as the days passed, his notes began to include observations of character, careful, respectful, capable. There was something in the way she walked, in the way she listened to the wind and water, that spoke of a deep understanding of life, of the land, of the natural world. Yet the more he observed, the more complicated things became. He overheard conversations from neighbors who were less kind in their words. "She doesn't belong here," one man muttered. "She'll take what's ours if we let her." Another said, "You can't trust her. She's different." These words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were unjust. He knew the woman he had seen was not the person these rumors painted. He faced a choice: continue to do as he had been asked, simply observing and reporting, or start to question the motives of those who had called him here in the first place. It was during one late afternoon that he first spoke to her, though not directly. She was gathering water in clay pots and humming softly, a melody that seemed old as the land itself. He rode slowly closer, not to startle her, and cleared his throat. She looked up sharply, her eyes dark and assessing. There was no fear there, only recognition that someone was present. "I'm not here to hurt you," he called out, keeping his distance. "Just observing, that's all." She nodded once, a slight smile forming on her lips, but she didn't speak. The rancher respected this. She didn't need to explain herself to him, not yet. He turned his horse around slowly, keeping his distance, and rode back to the ridge where he had been watching. That night, as he sat by his own campfire, he thought about the woman and the rumors. He thought about the choices he would have to make if he continued in this assignment. The simple task given to him now seemed heavy with responsibility. He had started out expecting a simple observation, a report to satisfy the landowner and authorities. But he realized he could not simply write down details without considering their truth. Observing without understanding was not enough. The next morning brought a new challenge. The woman moved through the land as she always had, but now he noticed her eyes, alert, careful, aware of everything around her. She watched animals, the sky, even him from a distance, though she never made any attempt to confront him. Her presence was commanding without force, noticeable without arrogance. The rancher began to wonder what it meant to truly belong somewhere, to respect the land so fully that others could not dictate your actions without reason. By the third day, he had begun keeping a different kind of journal, not just times and movements, but reflections. He wrote about her strength, her patience, and the quiet dignity she carried in every gesture. He wrote about the unfairness of the whispers that called her trouble. He wrote about the responsibility he now felt, not just to those who hired him, but to the truth of what he saw. And then, just as the sun dipped low over the horizon on the fourth evening, he saw it, a moment so simple yet striking that it stayed with him. She was helping a stray foal, injured and trembling, coaxing it gently with words he couldn't understand but tones he could feel. She cleaned a small wound on its leg, using water from the stream and a cloth she had made herself. The rancher's heart lifted. He had seen her kindness, her respect for life, and it reminded him of why he had chosen this land for himself, why he had dedicated himself to ranching and to the animals that could not speak for themselves. He realized then that the assignment would not be simple. Observing her, reporting her, these tasks had become far more complex than anything he had imagined. He had come to witness a person living truthfully, in harmony with her environment, while the world around her misunderstood and judged without reason. As he watched the sunset, the orange and pink light washing over the plains, he made a quiet promise to himself. He would do what was right, even if it meant defying those who had given him the assignment. He would watch, yes, but he would also understand, and he would protect the truth. That night the wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of earth, sage, and distant rain. The rancher knew that this was only the beginning. The story of the woman he had been sent to watch was just starting to unfold, and he would be a part of it, whether he wanted to or not. Something deep inside him had shifted. What had been a simple task had become a journey of conscience, of respect, and of discovery. And he knew that in the days to come, both of their lives would be changed forever. The next morning, the rancher woke before the sun had even touched the horizon. The plains were still dark, and the cool air carried the scent of dew and dry grass. He saddled his horse quietly, careful not to disturb the sleeping animals, and rode toward the ridge where he had first observed the Apache woman. Over the past few days, he had begun to feel a strange connection to the land through her eyes, her calm, careful ways, her respect for every living thing. He had expected to watch someone mysterious, maybe even troublesome. Instead, he saw someone who understood the world in ways he could only begin to imagine. As he approached the small clearing where she had built her modest shelter, he noticed subtle changes. The garden she had planted was thriving, tiny green sprouts reaching toward the sun, delicate yet strong. The foal he had seen the day before was now following her at a cautious distance, its trust growing with each gentle word she spoke. Birds hovered nearby, unafraid, chirping softly as she moved about her chores. She treated the land with a patience and attention that seemed rare, even among those who had lived here for generations. The rancher dismounted and let his horse graze nearby. He had learned to be still and silent, moving carefully so as not to disturb the natural rhythm of life around him. From a distance, he watched as she knelt to pull weeds from the garden, her fingers brushing the soil with care. He noticed the small things, the way she tied her hair back when it fell into her face, the soft hum of a tune she carried as she worked, the gentle way she brushed the foal's coat. Every movement spoke of someone grounded, someone at peace in their own skin. For the first time, the rancher felt more than curiosity. He felt respect. Not the kind of respect born out of fear or duty, but the kind that grew quietly when one observed honesty, kindness, and strength. He realized that his assignment, which had seemed simple and straightforward, had already changed him. He was no longer just watching. He was learning, questioning, and seeing the world differently through her presence. As the day wore on, he noticed the neighbors coming into view, peering over fences, whispering among themselves. They didn't approach her openly, but their suspicion was clear in their sideways glances and quiet conversations. "She thinks she owns the land," one muttered. "We can't let her take what belongs to us." Another added, "She's stubborn. Just wait, she'll make a mistake." The rancher frowned. He had expected some tension, of course, but the harshness of these words struck him. He remembered the way she had treated the foal, the care she had shown to the garden, the respect she had given to every creature she encountered. How could people judge her so quickly? How could they misunderstand someone so clearly connected to the land? He realized that the whispers and rumors he had been sent to observe were not a reflection of truth, but of fear and misunderstanding. He spent the afternoon following her movements, keeping a careful distance. She walked through the plains with a quiet confidence, her eyes scanning the horizon, alert yet calm. He noticed how she seemed to listen to the wind, the rustle of leaves, the distant calls of animals. It was as if she could hear things most people would miss, as if the land itself spoke to her and she responded in kind. He was fascinated. Later, he watched her gather wood for a small fire. Her movements were deliberate, careful, and efficient. She selected dry branches, avoiding green ones that would smolder or smoke too much. She arranged them neatly, stacking them so the fire could burn steadily without wasting wood. She was self-sufficient, and yet there was something gentle in the way she approached her tasks, a kindness that did not demand recognition but naturally drew it. For the rancher, these simple observations began to feel profound. He realized that his assignment was no longer just about watching, it was about understanding. He started to note not just her actions but her intentions. She was careful not to harm the land, the animals, or even the small creatures that crossed her path. She treated each day as a responsibility, a chance to live honestly and with purpose. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, he noticed a visitor. A young boy from a nearby farm had wandered near her shelter, curious and unafraid. The woman spoke to him softly, guiding him back toward the path to his home. There was no anger, no harshness, only gentle instruction. The boy left with a smile, waving, and she waved back, her expression calm and patient. The rancher felt a warmth in his chest. Here was someone who carried strength without force, kindness without weakness, and confidence without arrogance. He had expected someone difficult, someone who might cause trouble, and instead, he saw a person whose life was an example of balance and respect. He realized that his task, to watch and report, might require him to protect this truth rather than simply observe it. The following days brought small but significant challenges. The landowner and local authorities were impatient, pressing him for reports. They expected him to find fault, to see evidence of wrongdoing, to confirm the rumors. He struggled with the pressure, knowing that he could not lie, but also knowing that honesty might put him at odds with those who had hired him. Each time he sat down to write his report, he paused, thinking carefully about every word. He chose to describe what he saw: her care for the animals, her respectful use of the land, the quiet strength she showed in her daily routines. He did not judge, did not embellish, and did not speculate. But he also began to realize that truth could be more powerful than rumor. If he reported honestly, he could challenge the assumptions of the community, perhaps even change minds. One afternoon, he saw her struggling with a task that required both strength and patience. She was moving a heavy log to reinforce part of her shelter. The log was too heavy for her alone, and she paused, wiping sweat from her brow. Without thinking, the rancher dismounted and approached, offering help. At first she looked surprised, then wary. "I can manage," she said quietly, her voice steady but not unkind. "I know," he replied gently, "but 2 hands are easier than 1. Reluctantly, she nodded, and together they moved the log into place. There was no need for words beyond that. The rancher felt a sense of camaraderie forming, a quiet acknowledgement of mutual respect. For the first time, he realized that his role could be more than observer. He could be an ally. Over the next few days, he continued to watch, but he also began small acts of assistance when needed. He left water for her animals during the hottest part of the day, fixed a section of her fence that had fallen, and even brought fresh food when he noticed her stores running low. She did not ask for these things, nor did she seem to expect them. She accepted them with quiet gratitude, a nod, or a small smile. As he spent more time observing and helping, the rancher began to hear more of the whispers from neighbors and authorities. "Why is he helping her?" some asked. "He was hired to watch, not to get involved." Others shrugged. "Maybe he's just naive." He didn't care about their opinions. What mattered was what he saw with his own eyes. He had come to understand that judging someone without knowledge was a weakness, not a strength. And he had learned that the woman he had been sent to watch was not just surviving. She was thriving, living with dignity and courage in a world that was quick to misunderstand her. One evening, as the sky turned deep purple and stars began to appear, he sat by his campfire and reflected. He realized that he had begun to see the world differently. He had expected suspicion, perhaps even conflict, but what he found was a lesson in humanity, kindness, and respect. The woman was teaching him, without knowing it, that strength was not measured by force, but by integrity, patience, and the quiet care one gives to the world. By the end of the week, he knew that the task given to him, watching the Apache woman, was no longer simple. Observing her was not enough. He had to understand, to protect, and perhaps even to stand up for her. The world around them was filled with misunderstanding and prejudice, and he knew that being truthful might put him at odds with the community, but he was ready. He had seen too much, learned too much, and respected too much to turn away. As he rode back toward his own land that evening, the wind carried the scent of the plains, of sage, and of earth freshly warmed by the sun. He felt a sense of purpose that he hadn't felt in years. This woman, who had been seen as a problem by others, had shown him the truth of patience, courage, and respect. And he knew that the coming days would test both of them, not just in how they lived on the land, but in how they faced the world that so often misunderstood them. The rancher settled in for the night, listening to the soft rustle of the grass and the distant calls of animals. He thought about what he had seen, what he had learned, and what he might have to do in the days ahead. One thing was clear: this was no ordinary assignment. It was a lesson in humanity, a test of integrity, and a chance to witness the strength of a life lived with honesty and courage. And he was ready to see it through, no matter how challenging it might become. Days had passed since the rancher had begun to understand the Apache woman, and with each passing sunrise, his respect and admiration for her grew. He had expected a simple task, to watch, record, and report, but he found himself caught in something far deeper. Her life, though quiet and solitary, was full of courage, strength, and a deep connection to the land. He knew that the world around them didn't see it. People whispered about her, assumed she was trouble, and plotted ways to push her off the land. But the rancher, having witnessed her life firsthand, felt a growing sense of responsibility. One afternoon, he rode to the edge of a narrow ravine to check the fence along the property line. The sun was high, beating down on the grass and rocks, and he squinted against its glare. From his position, he saw her walking near the stream, gathering herbs and wild plants. Her movements were steady, almost meditative, and the foal trailed after her as always. She had noticed him before he saw her, but there was no fear in her eyes, only awareness, like a quiet acknowledgement of the land and its watchers. The rancher had begun to wonder about the assumptions of those who had hired him. They wanted him to find fault, to confirm their fears. But as he watched her, he realized there was nothing to report that could justify suspicion. Everything she did was careful and considerate, nothing careless, nothing reckless. She lived in harmony with the land, not against it. He had started to feel that reporting her in the way the landowner expected would be a lie, and lies were not part of his life. That evening, the rancher made his way closer than he had before. The woman was tending to a small fire near her shelter, preparing food in a pot over the flames. She worked with quiet efficiency, her hands moving with practiced skill. He dismounted and approached slowly, keeping his hands visible. "I won't get in your way," he said softly, stopping a few steps away. She looked up, meeting his gaze. There was no alarm, no sudden tension, only curiosity. "You've been watching me for days," she said simply. "Yes," he admitted. "I was supposed to report on you, but I can't. I see what you do, I know who you are, and it's not what people say." She studied him, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "You could leave," she said. "You don't have to stay." "I don't think I could," he said quietly. "Not anymore." They spoke little after that, but there was a shift in understanding. The rancher realized that his role was changing, from observer to protector, from a witness of her life to someone willing to act if necessary. He felt a moral responsibility that he had not anticipated. The simplicity of his original task had grown into something heavier, more meaningful. The next few days brought challenges that tested him. He began hearing more about plans to remove her from the land. Some neighbors wanted to claim parts of it, citing old agreements or technicalities. The authorities hinted that she might be breaking unspecified rules. The rancher listened carefully, weighing every word, noticing the eagerness of people to assume the worst. He knew that her life, quiet and self-sufficient, was being threatened not because of what she had done, but because of what others imagined she might do. One morning, as he rode near her shelter, he noticed her trying to lift a heavy water container from the stream to her shelter. It was awkward and difficult, and she paused frequently, balancing it on her shoulder. Without a word, he dismounted, went over, and helped her lift it. She did not protest. She accepted the help, recognizing it as practical and necessary. "You don't have to," she said softly. "I know," he replied, "but I want to." It was simple, yet significant. Their trust in each other was growing, not through grand gestures, but through small acts of care and understanding. The rancher began to notice the ways she moved through the world, how she watched the wind for signs of weather, how she listened to animals as if they spoke to her, how she respected every plant she touched. He had been raised on the land himself, but watching her reminded him of lessons he had long forgotten, the lessons of patience, observation, and quiet courage. That evening, as the sky glowed with shades of orange and purple, the rancher found himself thinking about the decisions he would have to make. The people who hired him expected a report, but a truthful report could expose their own misunderstandings and biases. He realized that honesty could have consequences, but he also knew that he could not betray what he had seen. The woman had earned his respect, and he would not allow her character to be misrepresented. The next day, he overheard a troubling conversation. Two men from the nearby town were talking near the property line, unaware that he could hear. "She can't stay here," one said. "We have every right to force her off. The law is on our side." "She's stubborn," the other said. "She won't leave willingly. We'll have to push harder." The rancher's jaw tightened. They did not know her, did not see her. They only saw what they feared or what they wanted to control. He knew that if they acted on their plan, it could disrupt not only her life but the balance she had created on the land. He felt a surge of determination. He could no longer remain passive. Observing was not enough. He had to act. That afternoon, he approached her shelter cautiously. She was arranging herbs in small bundles, her focus entirely on her work. "There are people planning to make trouble," he said quietly, keeping his voice low. She looked up, her expression calm but serious. "I know," she said. "I've heard whispers." "They don't understand you," he said. "They think they do, but they don't. You need protection." She nodded slowly. "Then I will accept yours," she said. The words were simple, but they carried weight. For the first time, the rancher felt that he was not only protecting her physically, but also affirming her right to live on the land with dignity. He realized that his actions could change the course of events, not through confrontation or aggression, but through honesty and steadfastness. Over the next several days, he worked quietly to support her. He reinforced her shelter, repaired fences, and left food and water when needed. He did not interfere with her routines, nor did he attempt to control her decisions. Instead, he ensured that the people who sought to undermine her had less opportunity to act. He watched carefully, intervening only when necessary, always with respect and discretion. Despite the growing tension around them, life continued with its quiet rhythm. She continued her work by the stream, tending her garden, caring for the foal, and moving with the calm confidence that had drawn his admiration. He found that watching her in these small moments was as powerful as any dramatic confrontation. The simple acts of living fully, of respecting the land and all its creatures, were lessons in strength and patience. One afternoon, a small incident tested their growing trust. A group of men approached her shelter, clearly intending to intimidate her. The rancher arrived just in time. He positioned himself between them and her, standing tall and steady. "She is not causing trouble," he said firmly. "You will leave her in peace." The men hesitated, clearly surprised by his presence and his tone. After a tense pause, they muttered under their breath and moved away. The rancher and the woman watched them leave. Neither spoke immediately, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. They were allies now, linked not by words but by respect, courage, and shared purpose. That night, as the wind moved softly across the plains, the rancher reflected on everything that had happened. His simple assignment had grown into something far more significant. Observing her life had taught him lessons about integrity, courage, and the importance of standing for what is right. He realized that his role was no longer limited to watching. He was part of her story now, and his actions could influence its outcome. The Apache woman, too, seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. She worked with quiet determination, unafraid of the challenges ahead. Together, they navigated the tension that surrounded her presence, relying on mutual respect and trust rather than conflict or aggression. As the stars appeared one by one in the night sky, the rancher knew that the days ahead would bring more challenges. There would be pressure, there would be conflict, and there would be decisions that tested his courage. But he was ready. He had witnessed her strength, her dignity, and her integrity, and he could not turn away. He understood that truth and fairness were sometimes more powerful than fear and prejudice, and he was prepared to stand for what was right. In the quiet of the night, the plains seemed alive with possibility. The rancher felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that the world around them could be changed, slowly and carefully, by honesty, courage, and respect. He had begun as an observer, but he would continue as a protector, an ally, and a witness to the life of a woman who lived with integrity and strength. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, he understood the meaning of responsibility, not just to those who hired him, but to the truth he had seen with his own eyes. And so, under the stars and the watchful eyes of the plains, the rancher prepared for the days to come, ready to face challenges with quiet courage, guided by the lessons he had learned from a woman who had taught him more in her silence than most could in a lifetime of words. The days that followed were tense, heavy with anticipation. The rancher knew that the quiet strength of the Apache woman had not gone unnoticed. Whispers from neighbors had grown louder. People who had once simply murmured about her presence now began to plan ways to push her off the land. They spoke of laws, property lines, and technicalities, but their words lacked truth. They were motivated not by justice, but by fear, misunderstanding, and the desire to control. The rancher rode early that morning, as he always did, toward the small rise from which he could see her shelter. The sun was just breaking over the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains. He watched her as she worked, arranging stones along the path she had made, watering her small garden and tending to the foal. Her movements were calm, deliberate, and patient. She seemed unaware of the tension that was growing around her, focused entirely on her tasks. It struck him again how wrong the rumors were. She was not difficult or dangerous. She did not seek conflict. She simply lived with dignity and respect, in harmony with the land. And yet, he knew that this was exactly what made some people uneasy. They saw independence and strength and mistook it for defiance. They saw quiet confidence and labeled it as stubbornness. He felt a protective instinct rising in him, a determination to defend her not with anger but with truth. By mid-morning, he noticed movement near the edge of the property. A small group of men had gathered, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. From their gestures and expressions, it was clear they were planning to approach her, to intimidate her into leaving. The rancher's heart tightened. He had anticipated challenges, but the thought of someone threatening her filled him with resolve. He knew he could not allow them to act unchecked. He rode closer, positioning himself between the men and her shelter. The foal, sensing tension, stayed close to the woman. She looked up, her calm expression unwavering, even as the men hesitated at the sight of him. "She is not causing trouble," he said firmly, his voice steady and loud enough for them to hear. "Leave her in peace." The men exchanged uneasy glances. One stepped forward, trying to assert authority. "We have every right to claim this land," he said, his tone sharp. "You can't just protect her, she doesn't belong here. "She does not harm anyone," the rancher replied, "and she lives with respect for this land just as I do. That is enough." There was a long pause. The men muttered among themselves, clearly frustrated by his refusal to step aside. Finally, they backed off, muttering under their breath, and disappeared over the hill. The rancher stayed where he was until they were completely gone, his eyes never leaving their retreating figures. Then he turned to the woman who had been watching silently. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. She nodded, her dark eyes steady. "I am," she said. "Thank you." It was a simple exchange, but it carried weight. The rancher realized that his role had changed completely. He was no longer just an observer. He was a protector, someone willing to stand between her and the misunderstanding and prejudice of the world. And he understood that his choices from this point forward would matter more than ever. Over the following days, he worked even more closely with her, though always respectfully, never intruding. He helped reinforce her shelter, fixed a small fence that had been damaged by a storm, and made sure her garden had enough water. Each small act was not a favor. It was an acknowledgement of her right to live freely and safely. She accepted his help with quiet gratitude, never asking for it, never expecting it. Their bond was growing, built on trust, respect, and mutual understanding. The tension in the community continued to rise. Some neighbors tried to gather support to challenge her presence formally, citing old agreements or vague laws. The rancher listened to every word, observing motives, questioning claims, and carefully documenting what he saw. He knew that the truth alone could protect her if presented clearly. Lies and rumors had no place here. One afternoon, he noticed a small group of people approaching again, this time with the intention to observe her more closely, perhaps even confront her. He rode ahead, intercepting them before they reached the shelter. "She does not harm anyone," he said, placing himself firmly between them and the woman. "You have no right to threaten her." The group hesitated, surprised by his assertiveness. They had expected to find a solitary woman, perhaps intimidated by their presence. Instead, they found a man who stood with calm determination, protecting someone they misunderstood. After a tense moment, they backed away, muttering complaints but making no move to act further. The rancher returned to the woman who had watched the entire interaction quietly. "Are you safe?" he asked. "I am," she replied, her voice steady. "Because of you." He shook his head. "It is not just me, it is the truth. You live rightly, and that is what matters. They cannot take that from you." As the days passed, he realized that his efforts were beginning to shift perceptions. Some neighbors, having witnessed his calm and steady defense of her, began to reconsider their assumptions. Not everyone, but a few started to see that the woman was not a threat, but a person who lived with integrity, courage, and respect for the land. It was slow, quiet work, but it mattered. One morning, the woman invited him to sit with her by the stream. She had prepared a simple meal of bread and herbs, and they ate together in silence, listening to the wind and the water. "You have done much for me," she said softly. "I only do what is right," he replied. "I could not let them judge you unfairly." She nodded, looking out over the water. Few people see clearly. Most only see what they want to see or what they fear. You see more than that. That is rare. The rancher felt a quiet warmth in his chest. She did not speak lightly. Her words carried sincerity and acknowledgement, and he understood that she recognized his efforts not as obligation, but as choice. Their bond was not one of dependence, but of mutual respect. As the week progressed, the rancher continued to support her, both physically and morally. He spoke to authorities when necessary, explaining the truth of her presence and the way she lived with care and dignity. He did not argue aggressively. He simply presented facts, observations, and evidence of her responsible stewardship of the land. Slowly, the tide began to shift. People who had once whispered and planned now hesitated. The rancher's calm, steady advocacy, combined with her visible integrity, made it difficult for others to justify their actions. Rumors of wrongdoing began to die away, replaced by cautious acknowledgement of her right to live there. One evening, after a long day of work, the rancher and the woman sat quietly by the fire. The foal rested nearby, and the wind carried the familiar scent of sage and earth. "You've done more than I expected," she said quietly. "I only do what is right," he replied. "But it has changed me. I have learned more from you than I could have imagined." She smiled faintly, her expression thoughtful. "Then perhaps this was meant to happen, not for you to watch me, but for both of us to learn." The rancher nodded. He realized she was right. The original assignment, to observe, to report, had grown into something far more significant. It had become a lesson in courage, integrity, and understanding. It had become a chance to stand for truth, even when it was difficult. The following days brought further tests. A few persistent neighbors attempted to stir conflict, but the rancher met each challenge with calm resolve. He documented everything carefully, observed motives, and relied on the woman's steady example of living rightly. Slowly, the community began to see the truth. They began to realize that their fear and assumptions had been misguided. By the end of the week, the tension had eased significantly. The woman continued her work, tending the land and caring for the animals with the same quiet strength she always had. The rancher remained by her side, not as a master or protector, but as an ally, someone who could stand for her when others would not, someone who understood her life and respected it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the plains in shades of pink and gold, the rancher felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had begun this assignment as a task, a duty, something expected of him. But it had grown into a journey of conscience, respect, and moral courage. He had defended truth against rumor, integrity against misunderstanding, and dignity against fear. The woman turned to him, her dark eyes catching the last light of the sun. "You've changed more than the others," she said softly. "And you've changed me," he replied. It was a simple acknowledgement, but it carried the weight of everything they had experienced together. The challenges were not over, and there would be more tests ahead. But for the first time, he felt confident that they could face whatever came, guided by truth, respect, and quiet courage. As the night settled over the plains, the stars appearing one by one in the clear sky, the rancher and the woman sat in companionable silence. The wind moved gently through the grass, carrying the scents of earth and sage. He thought about the people who had doubted her, the rumors that had circulated, and the misunderstandings that had clouded judgment. But he also thought about the lessons he had learned, the lessons of integrity, observation, patience, and moral courage. He knew that in the days to come, more challenges would arise. There would be people who still misunderstood, who still feared, who still judged without knowledge. But he was ready. He had learned to stand firmly, not with anger but with calm, steadfast truth. He had learned to protect what was right without needing recognition or reward. And he had learned that true courage was not in confrontation alone, but in the quiet, consistent defense of what was fair and just. The Apache woman looked out across the plains, her expression serene, her posture calm and dignified. The rancher knew that her strength and patience had taught him more than any task, any assignment, or any job ever could. He had been sent to watch her, but in truth, she had taught him how to see clearly, act wisely, and stand courageously. The night stretched on, quiet and full of promise. The rancher knew that the next day would bring more challenges, but he was ready. Together, they had begun to face the world not with fear or anger, but with truth, integrity, and respect. And that, he realized, was far more powerful than any rumor or prejudice could ever be. The next morning dawned clear and bright over the plains. The sun rose slowly, spilling golden light across the grass, the hills, and the small shelter where the Apache woman lived. There was a quiet beauty in the early hours, a sense of calm before what the rancher knew would be a challenging day. He had spent the past weeks observing, protecting, and learning from her. Now, he felt a responsibility deeper than anything he had known before. Today, he would act to ensure that the truth of her life could no longer be ignored. He rode to the ridge overlooking her shelter, careful to keep his horse steady on the rocky path. The woman was already awake, gathering herbs and feeding the foal. She looked up and smiled faintly when she saw him, a gesture of understanding and partnership. She had come to trust him as he had come to trust her. Their bond was no longer just about protection. It was about mutual respect, about standing together in the face of unfairness. Word had begun to spread among the neighbors that the rancher had chosen to defend her. Some were surprised, others were irritated. A few had begun to question their own assumptions, having witnessed firsthand the quiet strength and dignity of the woman. Rumors of wrongdoing were slowly dying, replaced by curiosity and cautious acknowledgement. But there were still those who would not see the truth, who clung to prejudice and fear, ready to act at the first opportunity. The rancher knew that he could not allow this. He had spent too many hours watching, learning, and documenting. He had seen her kindness, her respect for the land, her careful attention to every living thing around her. He had witnessed her courage, her patience, and her determination to live rightly. And he knew that defending her was no longer optional. It was a moral imperative. By late morning, a small group of officials arrived, papers in hand, intending to formally challenge her right to remain on the land. They spoke politely, but their tone carried a subtle weight of authority. The rancher met them at the edge of her property, standing tall and calm. He did not speak aggressively, but his presence made it clear that he was fully committed to her cause. "I have observed her," he said steadily. "She lives in harmony with this land. She respects every creature, every plant, and every rule. There is no harm in her presence. The truth is clear. She has a right to remain here." The officials exchanged glances, surprised by his certainty. They asked questions, presented laws, and attempted to challenge his statements, but the rancher remained composed. He spoke only of facts, observations, and evidence he had gathered over weeks of careful watching. He described her daily routines, her care for the animals, and her respectful use of the land. He spoke of the moments when he had seen her kindness, her courage, and her integrity. The officials listened, their expressions slowly shifting. It was clear that his testimony carried weight. They could see that his words were honest, that he had no agenda other than truth. After a long discussion, they left, promising to review the evidence carefully. The rancher knew this was only a temporary victory, but it was significant. He had stood firmly for what was right, and for the first time, others had to acknowledge the truth he presented. As the day continued, neighbors who had once whispered and judged approached cautiously. Some apologized quietly, acknowledging their misjudgment. Others simply observed, their expressions thoughtful and uncertain. The presence of the rancher, calm and unwavering, and the evident dignity of the woman had begun to shift opinions. People could no longer claim ignorance, and many found themselves reevaluating assumptions that had been accepted for years. The woman and the rancher worked side by side that afternoon, repairing fences, tending the garden, and caring for the foal. There was a quiet rhythm to their work, a harmony that reflected the trust and understanding between them. They did not speak unnecessarily, but their actions communicated more than words ever could. Each task completed, each small achievement, was a silent affirmation of her right to live on the land in peace. As evening approached, the rancher and the woman sat together by the small fire near her shelter. The sky was painted with deep oranges and purples, the first stars beginning to appear in the clear sky above. "You have done more than I could have imagined," she said softly, her voice carrying both gratitude and recognition. "I only did what was right," he replied. "It would have been wrong to watch and say nothing, to let false assumptions dictate your life. You have shown me the meaning of strength and courage." She smiled faintly, her expression calm and dignified. "Perhaps this was meant to happen, not just for you to see, but for you to learn, and for the world to understand." The rancher nodded. He knew she was right. What had begun as a simple task had grown into a journey of conscience, moral courage, and deep understanding. He had learned to observe without judgment, to act with integrity, and to stand firmly for what was right. And through it all, he had learned from her example how to live with patience, respect, and quiet determination. The following days were a mix of relief and vigilance. The officials had returned, their review of the evidence thorough and careful. The woman's right to remain on the land was officially recognized. The community, too, began to adjust. Those who had once whispered and feared now watched with a mixture of admiration and cautious respect. Some approached her with quiet curiosity, asking questions, seeking to understand, rather than assuming the worst. The rancher continued to stand nearby, ready to assist, but he no longer had to intervene constantly. The woman had earned her place through her actions, and the community was beginning to see it. Her life, her choices, and her dignity had become impossible to ignore. The truth had prevailed, not through conflict, but through patience, integrity, and steadfast observation. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the plains, the woman invited the rancher to walk with her along the stream. They moved slowly, observing the land, listening to the rustle of grass and watching the foal play nearby. "You have changed more than the others," she said quietly. "And you have changed me," he replied. "I came here to observe, but I leave with lessons I will carry for the rest of my life. You have taught me patience, courage, and the importance of truth." She nodded, her expression serene. "And you have stood for what is right. Not everyone would have done that. Not everyone sees clearly or chooses to act." They continued walking, side by side, the wind moving gently through the plains. The rancher felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that his choices had made a difference. The woman's life had been at risk not from her own actions, but from the misunderstandings and prejudices of others. By standing with her, by speaking the truth, he had helped to correct that injustice. As night fell, the plains were quiet, filled with the gentle sounds of nature. The stars reflected in the small stream, and the fire near the shelter crackled softly. The rancher and the woman sat together, observing the beauty of the land, the strength of life, and the lessons they had learned. They did not need words to communicate the sense of accomplishment, relief, and understanding that filled them. The weeks that followed brought stability. The woman continued to live on the land, her routines unchanged, her dignity intact. The rancher remained nearby, not as a protector alone, but as a witness, a friend, and an ally. The community slowly adjusted, and many who had once doubted her now regarded her with respect. The truth had prevailed, and the power of integrity had been proven. One evening, as the sun set over the plains, the rancher reflected on everything that had happened. He had been sent to watch, to report, and perhaps to judge. Instead, he had witnessed courage, patience, and strength. He had seen how living with integrity and respect could change the world, even if slowly. And he had learned that standing firmly for truth, even against fear and misunderstanding, was one of the most powerful acts a person could perform. The Apache woman, sitting nearby, looked out over the land she had nurtured and protected. Her expression was calm, proud, and serene. She had faced challenges, prejudices, and threats, and had emerged with her dignity intact. The rancher knew that her life was a testament to the power of patience, courage, and quiet strength. And he knew that, in standing with her, he had not only helped protect her life, but had been changed himself. As the night settled over the plains, the wind carrying the scents of earth, sage, and grass, the rancher and the woman sat together quietly. There were no grand celebrations, no dramatic gestures. There was only the simple, profound understanding that truth, respect, and courage had triumphed. Their lives had been forever touched by the events of the past weeks, and the lessons they had learned would remain with them always. In the stillness of the night, with stars shining overhead and the land stretching endlessly around them, the rancher realized the full significance of what had happened. What had started as a task, a simple observation, had become a story of integrity, moral courage, and steadfast dedication. He had seen injustice challenged, truth defended, and dignity preserved. And he had witnessed firsthand the quiet, unassuming power of a life lived rightly. The Apache woman, calm and poised, turned to him and said softly, "You have left an impression on this land and on me, not just through your actions but through your honesty, your courage, and your understanding." "And you have left an impression on me," he replied. "Through your strength, your patience, and your unwavering integrity, I will carry these lessons always." The wind moved through the plains, whispering softly in the grass. The foal slept peacefully nearby, the fire glowed warmly, and the night stretched on, calm and full of promise. The rancher knew that the world outside the plains might not always understand or appreciate the quiet victories of truth and integrity. But here, in this place, he had witnessed something rare and profound: the triumph of honesty, courage, and respect, and the lasting impact of standing firmly for what is right. And so, under the stars, with the land stretching endlessly around them, the rancher and the Apache woman remained, not as protector and protected, but as allies, witnesses, and friends. Their story had reached a conclusion that left everyone who understood it truly breathless, not because of drama or confrontation, but because of the quiet power of truth, courage, and the unwavering human spirit.